Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Titan disaster and other last day signs. Okay, so there's a lot going on. So let's talk about it. Okay, so I'm sure you heard about the Titan submersible that it imploded. And so here's the picture of them picking up the debris. Well, they got it out of the ocean and now they're putting it on a truck in this picture. Okay, so I think the Titan was the last day sign. Let's look at the numbers connected to it. Okay, so first we'll talk about the Titanic. So the Titan sub was trying to get down to the Titanic to take a look at the Titanic, okay? And what's interesting about the Titanic is that it sunk on April 14th to the 15th. It hit the iceberg on the 14th and sunk on the 15th, okay? In 1912, okay? And that was 111 years ago, okay? So that number 11 stands out to me because I think 11 is the number of judgment, okay? But it also connects to 9/11, okay? And then this year, April 14th and 15th were right after Passover, like the 9th day of Passover. So we have that, we kind of have that 9/11 number like hidden in there, okay? And April 14th was the day of the 8th Omer, and then that night you count the 9th Omer, okay? The way the Jewish people count the Omer, that's how it works, okay? So that number 9 is showing up, the number 8 is showing up. And April 15th, the Torah reading that the Jewish people read on the 15th is called Shemini, which means 8th, okay? So that 8 number is showing up too, okay? And so I think that's significant because we're waiting right now for the 8th king, okay? So I believe that Obama was the 5th king, Trump was the 6th king, Biden is the 7th king, okay? And so then we're waiting for the 8th king, which I believe the 6th king becomes the 8th king, okay? We read about that in Revelation. That might be Revelation 17. And then the 8 and the 9 too that show up remind me of Av 8 to 9, okay? And that's the current date that I'm looking at because there's so it's got such significance. The 9th of Av is really a 9/11 type date, okay? And that is coming up next week, okay? So Av is actually the 11th month on the Hebrew calendar, okay? And so those dates, Av 8 to 9, correspond to July 26th and July 27th, okay? So coming up really soon, less than a week away. So those are interesting numbers. And then what was interesting too about the April 14th and the 15th, you know, connected to the first Passover. Like I said, it was like the 9th day of the first Passover, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more. If you watched my last video, I talked about what I think might be the 3 Passover signs. Even though in my last video, I believe I got the dates of the 3rd Passover wrong. But I'll give you the correct dates in this video. And then what happened was the Titan. Okay, so that was the Titanic. Okay, then the Titan, this year, the Titan implosion was on June 18th, okay? What's interesting about June 18th is that with the 18, you could either make it 666 or you can make it the number 9. 1 plus 8 equals 9. So that's interesting, okay? And then what I believe is that the implosion happened in what I'm calling the middle of the third Passover. Okay. So I believe that the three Passovers were April, May, and June. Okay, and then the third Passover is kind of a hidden Passover. It's not talked about in Scripture. But I saw a repeat of patterns with the Passovers. And so that's why I think there was kind of this hidden third Passover. And so it was interesting that this implosion happened in the middle of what I'm calling the third Passover. Okay, but we didn't know. Okay, so we weren't sure that there was an implosion until June 22nd. That's when they came on the news. Like they were looking for them from the 18th to the 22nd. And so we weren't sure that there was an implosion until June 22nd. Okay, and that's the fifth day after June 18th. Okay, what was interesting is that 5 people died in this implosion. So that number 5 is coming up. Okay, so the significance of the number 5 is like, I believe we're waiting for the time that the Bible calls the dividing of time. Okay, and so I kind of think of like in Revelation 11 it talks about like 3.5 days. Okay, and so I think of that number 5 connecting to like a half, 0.5. So I think that connects to the dividing of time. Okay, and then June 22nd would be the 8th day of the third Passover. So there's that 8 number again. So definitely very interesting. But then to me, the most fascinating thing was, okay, so the people that owned the Titan submersible, they were called Ocean Gate Expeditions. Okay, we'll add up those letters. Okay, you got 5 plus 4 in Ocean Gate gives you 9, and Expeditions gives you 11. Isn't that incredible? Okay, so 9/11 definitely showing up. Okay. So for the last day signs, we really want to be paying attention and following the patterns. Okay, and so I feel like James Cameron kind of did a good summary. He compared the submersible tragedy to the Titanic sinking, okay? And he said, I'm struck by the similarity of the Titanic disaster, okay? So let's read this part of the article. Cameron, who famously directed the Oscar-winning blockbuster Titanic, told ABC News on Thursday he noticed parallels between the 1912 sinking of the British passenger liner and the demise of the submersible designed specifically to visit what remains of the sunken ship. I'm struck by the similarity of the Titanic disaster itself, where the captain was repeatedly warned about ice ahead of his ship, and yet he steamed up full speed into an ice field on a moonless night, Cameron said. And many people died as a result. And for us, well, I think they didn't exactly quote him here because it doesn't quite make sense, but I'll read it. And for us, very similar tragedy where warnings went unheeded to take place at the exact same site. So it is really uncanny of just the parallels between the Titanic and the Titan. Okay. The Titanic, the captain of the ship, was just arrogant. He didn't, he actually didn't even really believe that ships in his day would sink. He just felt like they were built so well. So he really just had this arrogant attitude. And so when people were trying to warn him about slowing down, because of the ice in the ocean, he didn't pay attention. And I'm not even sure what warnings he got. They were so busy, like the telegram office on the ship was so busy sending personal telegrams that they weren't getting the warning telegrams. if that's what they were called in the day, telegrams or whatever the messaging system was in the day. Um, so so definitely, I definitely think the Titanic is a huge sign for the last days. Okay, and it's just interesting how with this Titan submersible tragedy that the whole story of the Titanic came back, and especially with the Titan, like it's been on the news, like there's been a new story or whatever about it, like almost every day, and new videos to watch, and so it is definitely very strongly in the news. Okay, um, um, so very interesting. And then I thought I heard somebody on the 22nd. So this quote from James Cameron was from the 22nd. He was on ABC News. And I thought I heard somebody saying on the 22nd when I was watching the news that the Titan disaster proves that we didn't learn the lesson we needed to learn from the Titanic. But I couldn't find it anywhere. So I'm not really sure. But, I mean, this is the truth. The guy, Stockton Rush, he was very similar to the captain of the Titanic, just very arrogant, didn't want to follow the rules, just, basically, I don't know, like he kind of thought he was like, creating something new, and I think he thought he was unsinkable too. Okay. I mean, he must have, because, he himself got in this submersible and took it down. I mean, he used, so he made a lot of mistakes building this submersible. He used carbon fiber, which, a lot of people had said this is a terrible material to use for submersibles. I mean, it's not a tested material. Like, you need to use something stronger, like titanium. um, and then the other thing, so like I said, Stockton Rush broke all the rules. One of the things that he did was he made his submersible was a tube shape rather than a sphere shape. Okay, so then the pressure on his submersible was stronger than what would be on a sphere. And like he didn't want to follow the rules, and so he kind of like he was in, oh, how did they say that? He was in international waters, and he didn't really answer to kind of any country. And he didn't do the regular testing that other submersibles go through. And the certification process, he blew that off. So definitely like trying to write his own rules. And tons of people tried to warn him, but he didn't listen. And I kind of think too that Stockton Rush was a huckster, that like he tried to paint this submersible as kind of the cutting edge of submersible technology. And, he thought he was so cool that he, was using, the material that was lighter than, like titanium or like steel or something like that. And then I think it's kind of coming out that he kind of painted a picture that he was connected to the University of Washington when he wasn't. And I think there was another place too that he tried to say it was connected to try to give an impression of, just more, what do you call it? That they were, more of, more like trying to give an impression that they were kind of more traditional rather than kind of this fly by night company that wasn't really connected to anything. So definitely a very interesting story. Okay. I mean, and a tragedy, very sad. So just a lot of arrogance. and it's sad that he took people down with him. So I wanted to look at the meaning of the name the Titan. Okay. Um, so if it's capitalized, it's any of a family of giants in Greek mythology born of Uranus and Gaia and ruling the earth until overthrown by the Olympian gods. Um, a second definition is one that is gigantic in size or power, one that stands out for greatness of achievement. Um, so even when you see the name that he gave his submersible, you could kind of see that arrogance of Stockton Rush. And then the Google Oxford Dictionary defines it as a person or thing of very great strength, intellect, or importance, a titan of American industry. So what was interesting is that they recovered the debris on June 28th. So still looking at these dates here. That was the 11th day after June 18th. Okay. What's interesting about June 28th is that is Tammuz 9 on the Hebrew calendar. So we got that 9 number there. We got that 11 number there. Okay. So very interesting. Okay. And to me, what's interesting too is that Tammuz 9, is the date a month before the 9th of Av. Okay, so I definitely think God is sending us a message with this submersible tragedy. And so I'm thinking that, so I highlighted here with the meaning of Titan, the part about ruling the earth. Okay. Because I think the Titan implosion is a message for the people that are currently, in positions of power right now. Okay. So I wrote the Titan implosion could be a message for Joe Biden. Okay, who is currently, in charge of America. Okay. And especially because of the 9/11 connection. So Joe Biden's Hebrew birthday, when you convert it, it's actually 9/11 on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. So I definitely think the Titan implosion could be a message for Joe Biden. I mean, really, it's a message for everybody. I believe God's using this tragedy to send a message. Okay. A message of warning. Okay. So let's see if there's a scriptural connection. Okay. So ultimately, we found out that the Titan imploded just a few hours after its descent on June 18th. Okay. When we finally heard the whole story and stuff. That they suspected that it imploded on June 18th, even though, they actually spent some time looking for it and stuff, and that was Father's Day. Okay. And so I was looking at that 18 number, and I'm wondering if this connects to Revelation 18, because listen to this, it connects. Okay. Revelation 18 says, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven having great authority, and the earth was illumined with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back, even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her. To the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and will never see morning. Okay. So it's really interesting because I think these passages um, could, are like true for both the Titanic and the Titan, especially the part where they, the harlot of Babylon says, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow and will never see morning. Okay. That was so true for the Titanic. The captain never thought it would sink, He thought he would never see a boat in his day, the ships that they built in his day sink, because he thought they were built so well. And then, the same thing for Stockton Rush. Would he, if he thought it was gonna sink, do you think he'd keep getting in it all the time and, sending it down? So to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, okay, so that kind of connects to Stockton, how he, just really built up his company, built up himself, um, and so then fallen, just really connects to this submersible falling into the ocean, and, like, so the expression like fallen is Babylon the Great. It's like fallen is the Titanic the Great. It was this, very, um, famous ship, that sunk, that fell, and so then it goes on. Revelation 18:21 says, then a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer. So I thought this passage was very significant, because, okay, so think about the time that Revelation was being written. They didn't have like submersibles and stuff, but they had stones, okay? They had millstones. And so this angel, that John was seeing when he wrote the book of Revelation, wanted to like paint a picture to John of what Babylon, Babylon's fall was going to look like. So he took a stone and he threw it into the sea. Okay, so he took this really heavy, millstones are really heavy because that's what they used to, grind up their flour. And I'm sure it made a big splash when it went into the sea, and so the angel was using the stone to, paint this picture of, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer. So I think this is just a prophetic parallel to the submersible, that now God is using this submersible, so we could see how this submersible, was, just collapsed with violence. I mean, there's actually animated videos on YouTube where you could watch and see what the implosion looks like, and it just looks like a horrifying way to die. And so I believe that God's using this submersible to show us that, Babylon's going to be thrown down. It's going to have a violent overthrow. Okay. So, so what is Babylon is probably your question. So in this passage, it talks about Babylon being the great city. Okay. And I connect the references to the city to Joe Biden. Okay. And because I kind of think now that like Biden, the city's connect to Biden because he's in power. And then what I think is like Trump and his followers are like in the wilderness. Okay. And so when we read about cities, I think of Biden. Okay. And so I really think, and so going back to here, so Babylon, like when you read about Babylon, it talks about all the nations have drunk of the wine of the passion of her immoralities, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her. Um, and then for sins have piled up as high as heaven. Okay. And so what I think is that um, when you read about the kings of the earth committing acts of immorality with her, that connects to Biden's, kind of the one world like government or one world, I don't know what you would call it, thing that he's got going on. And really, it started with Obama because he was the one that was kind of uniting all the different nations, under his agenda. Okay. And they have, climate change is one of their agendas. The gay rights is one of their agendas, and women's rights, I guess, is one of their agenda. The blacks, just a lot of the left's, belief system and stuff you could kind of like see as part of this government or religion that was started with Obama and then continued with Biden, okay? Because Biden came and really picked up where Obama had left off. And, so like the G7, is definitely all the different nations that are, kind of connected to Biden, okay? And I mean, one of the things is that they're really that wanting to spend America's money for their climate change agenda, and and other agenda that they have. They really want to use America's money. Um, um, so that's what I believe, and so I think Babylon the Great can connect to Biden, okay, and G7, okay. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Here's another verse that I found, okay. This is from Zephaniah 3. It says, "Woe to her who is rebellious and defiled, the tyrannical city." Okay, so there's that city word again, okay. "She heeded no voice. She accepted no instruction. She did not trust in the Lord. She did not draw near to her God. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are wolves at evening. They leave nothing for the morning. Her prophets are reckless, treacherous men. Her priests have profaned the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. I have cut off nations. Their corner towers are in ruins. I have made their streets desolate with no one passing by. Their cities are laid waste, without a man, without an inhabitant. I said," so this would be God, "surely you will revere me, accept instruction. So her dwelling will not be cut off, according to all that I have appointed concerning her." But, okay, so God didn't cut them off at first, okay? But then he said they were eager to corrupt all their deeds, okay? So God gives them a time to exist, okay? But really they take that time to just sin, be reckless, not follow God's law. So then what happens to him? So then God says, "Therefore wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up as a witness. Indeed, my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation, all my burning anger. For all the earth will be devoured by the fire of my zeal." Okay, so there's a time where we didn't see God bring in his judgment, but at some point he's going to come and bring his judgment on the nations, okay? So one thought, I was looking at Stockton's name, okay? Stockton Rush. So here's the thought I had was, be in a rush to take stock of your life, okay? Unlike Stockton Rush, okay? And so here's some proverbs that might connect to Stockton. Okay. The wise of heart will receive commands, but a babbling fool will be ruined. Okay, so he might have been a babbling fool. Okay. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes. Okay. But a wise man is he who listens to counsel. So Stockton Rush was not listening to the counsel of the people around him. A wise man is cautious and turns away from evil, but a fool is arrogant and careless. Okay, so Stockton Rush was arrogant and careless. A fool rejects his father's discipline, but he who regards reproof is sensible. Okay, so don't be like Stockton, regard reproof. Okay, if people are giving you warnings, you want to listen to that. A rebuke goes deeper into one who has understanding than 100 blows into a fool. So how many times was Stockton warned and he didn't pay attention? Okay, so he was a fool. Okay. And then it says, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Okay, so the people that got on the submersible with Stockton would have been better off to, meet a bear robbed of her cubs. Okay, so definitely interesting verse. So one of the things I saw on YouTube, and I saw a video on YouTube, and it came from, okay, so there's a transcript going around, and it's kind of unconfirmed. We don't really know if this is the true transcript. But the one video that I saw was going over this transcript. I mean, it looks like it could be authentic. I mean, it would kind of take a lot for someone to make something like that up, but who knows? I don't know. Maybe they used AI or something to make it up. But what was interesting about the video that I was watching is he was taking the numbers from this transcript, and he had decided that the submersible most likely imploded at 9:47. Okay, so I just thought that was interesting because I was looking at those numbers going, so that would be 9:47 a.m. And so I thought that was interesting because I'm like, oh, that's 9/11. And then what he thought to the video that I was watching, and unfortunately I don't remember who did it now, but he had thought that when he was looking at the information in the transcript, he thought the Titan was descending faster than they usually do. And so he had a theory that maybe it was taken on water, like it sprung a leak. Because according to this transcript, it looks like they lost some of their equipment wasn't working. And so maybe it sprung a leak that was burning out its equipment. Okay, which I thought that was interesting. Well, because the other thing too was the theory of this guy that I was watching thought, we're gonna have to wait and see kind of what they say when the investigation is done. But this guy, his theory was that, maybe the water that the submersible was taking on was making it heavier, and that's why it was descending faster. And so if that's true, that would be another similarity to the Titanic, okay? Because water was what made the Titanic sink, okay? So we'll have to wait and see if that ends up being true. Let's see here. Okay, so, so like I said, Titan, is a name that kind of means like ruling the earth. Okay. So I wrote that Joe Biden should be reading the writing on the wall. Okay. And I have thought for the longest time that Biden is Belshazzar that we find in Daniel 5. Okay. Which that 5 number there is interesting because that could connect to the dividing of time. So Belshazzar was a king that was feasting and drinking wine with his nobles, wives, and concubines. Okay. I didn't put the whole story in here. I just put parts of it. So I highly recommend you go read it. But it says, O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. Yet you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. Then the hand was sent from him, and this, from God, and this inscription was written out. Now, this is the inscription that was written out. Okay, now, so there was a hand, this is the chapter where the expression, read the writing on the wall comes from, okay? Because in this chapter, there's actually a hand is sent from God that writes on the wall, okay? And to me, what's significant about that too is a hand has 5 fingers. So that number 5 is there again, okay, dividing of time. Okay, then the hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. Now this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and Persians. Okay, so I highlighted too because I thought what was interesting is that you have that 26 number there and the 27th number, that connect to, God is numbering your kingdom and putting an end to it, and then being weighed on the scales and found deficient. So that could connect, maybe we'll see, connects to July 26th and 27th. So it talks about Belshazzar's father was Nebuchadnezzar, okay? And there's a whole chapter in Daniel 1, I think, or early in Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar, he ended up, he was great, and then ended up, kind of like becoming like a beast of the field, okay? So one thought I had is, maybe Nebuchadnezzar could be like Obama, okay, because Obama was, like great. But then when Obama's heart was lifted up and he became proud that he behaved arrogantly, God, took away his throne, okay, his power, okay. And so I was thinking that Biden should learn from all these people who have lost their power after being arrogant. Okay, so I wrote Obama. I mean, same thing happened to Trump. When Trump got arrogant, he lost his power. They even took him off of, YouTube and Facebook. And then the same thing happened to Netanyahu, although Netanyahu has since returned to power. Lapid is a very good example that people can learn from because, we'll talk about that coming up. And then Macron of France, okay? And we'll talk about him on the next slide. Okay, so the day before the debris of the Titan was picked off the bottom of the ocean was June 27th, okay? That's Tammuz 8, okay? So what was interesting about that day was on that day in France, police end up shooting a 17-year-old and rioting ensues, okay? So it was a very similar situation to the George Floyd riots in the United States, okay? One of the things about the George Floyd riots is that they happened on the 119th to 120th day after the deal of the century that, quote unquote, that Trump did with Israel, okay? On January 28th, 2020, okay? So it's interesting because if you look at the 119, time frame, the 119 days after the deal of the century, that connects to 9/11, okay? But I also think 120 is significant because we read in Noah, that God was only going to give man because man was wicked, God was only going to give him 120 years. Okay, so 120 is like a time of judgment too. Okay. Um, so, yeah, so they, so this rioting kind of went on for a while. I haven't really heard the news, like if things have calmed down in France, but things were looking pretty bad in France, like that last week of June. Okay, so what's interesting about Macron of France, okay, I mean, he's definitely another guy who's really arrogant. He's part of the G7, worked a lot with Obama, now he's doing things with Biden, okay. On December 1st last year, Biden, here's his remarks in a joint press conference that he had with President Macron of France, okay. Biden says we're working together to support the Middle East that is more integrated, peaceful, and prosperous. And we want to particularly thank President Macron for his efforts to help bring about the historic Maritime Boundaries Agreement between Israel and Lebanon. Okay, so I talked about this maritime agreement in some of my previous videos. I definitely think that's one of the big sins of Biden, okay, because of his administration. Because they took some of Israel's sea land and gave it to their enemies, okay? And so the Biden administration, they worked behind the scenes, and Lapid was the prime minister of Israel at the time, and he had signed that paperwork. Let me think, is that how it works? Yeah, I think so. And so then Lapid, so really fast judgment on Lapid, okay? So exactly 1 week after signing this maritime agreement, he was conceding the election in Israel to Netanyahu. Okay, so Lapid really ended up losing, like just being judged really quick, okay, for signing this maritime agreement. Because, I mean, God is not happy when people, try to divide the land of Israel, try to take out the land, because, Israel, the thing about this sea land is kind of valuable, that they wanted to use it. I think they're looking for natural gas, under the sea there. I mean, it could be regular gas, but I think it might be natural gas. And so then it's an agreement that they made with Lebanon. So then what it does is Israel ended up would be getting less of the profits, while Lebanon would be getting more of the profits from this land, okay? I mean, generally, when there's two countries next to each other, you kind of draw a straight line into the sea, and say this part is ours and that part is yours. But they made the line crooked, like it leans over into Israel. So they lost part of their, valuable sea land. Seems weird to say sea land, but I don't know what else to call it. So, Biden should learn from that, okay? Well, so now that we know Macron, of France was a part of that, Macron of France was part of that, we can watch what's happening with France, and I mean, the one video I saw was, I don't know who it was, this one woman was really lamenting the fall of France, okay, because she was saying, like, we were this great country and now it's just a train wreck. So because this past year in France, in January 1st, they had a protest over the pension reform bill, okay, that they started on January 19th, and then on June 27th was these protests over police violence and racism. And it is really sad. If you could just really see the downfall of France, because it did used to be a really nice place to go visit and stuff. So definitely we're seeing judgment coming to Macron, okay? And so Biden should take note. His day is coming. Okay, so this year, okay, so I talked about the 3 Passovers. So I believe there was the real regular Passover in April, okay, and that was April 5th, 6th through the 12th. Okay, Easter ended up being like the 4th day of the Passover. The second Passover was on May 5th. Okay, is an actual thing that the Jewish people commit, like celebrate. They eat matzah on that day. It's only a 1-day thing for the Jewish people. Okay, but if you follow the pattern of the regular Passover, then you can make it a 7-day feast from May 5th to the 6th. I mean, it's actually, it was, God talks about it, in the Torah. It was given to the Israelites for the people that weren't able to celebrate the first Passover. Okay. And so then I was wondering about, is there like a hidden third Passover that, like, the first 2 Passovers kind of happened on the Hebrew dates, but I'm wondering if this third Passover happened on the Gregorian dates. Okay. And so was it June 14th, 15th to June 21st? Okay. Now, the reason why I'm thinking that, well, I talked about it in my last video, like a bunch of different reasons, because there's a bunch of passages in the Bible that kind of, like maybe paint a picture of 3 Passovers, okay? But one of the things that I really think is that, that this year, the patterns from these 3 Passovers, there was a lot of repeat of things that happened, okay? And the most significant one had to do with, like, Trump's 2 indictments, okay? But then in the middle, the second Passover, there was 4 Proud Boys that were in court too, okay? And all these court dates happen on like the 13th, okay? So like I said, the first 2 Passovers connected to the Hebrew calendar. So the court dates were Nisan 13 and Iyar 13, okay? But then the third Passover court date happened on June 13th. So, is that a coincidence, or, is God painting some kind of picture? Okay. So on Nisan 13, so the first Passover, that was when we saw Trump being indicted in New York on 34 counts. Okay. So that happened on April 4th. Okay. Which, by the way, I wanted to point out this too. Another 9/11 sign is, okay, so you know how Trump is the 45th president? Okay. So 4 plus 5, what does that add up to? 9, right? Okay, so we got that number 9. Okay. Well, so then now Biden's the 46th president. Okay. And so if Trump is really going to return and be the 47th president, what does 47 add up to? It adds up to 11. So we see another 9/11 sign, okay, from those numbers, okay. So then for the second Passover, that's when the 4 Proud Boys were found guilty of seditious conspiracy, and that happened on May 4th, okay. What was interesting about that was that, people really felt like they were kind of being the scapegoats, or maybe you could say the Passover lambs, taking the punishment for, something that Trump should have been getting the punishment for. They really think, Trump was the top dog, okay? And the Proud Boys are kind of like the foot soldiers, okay? Although they did break the law, so, and then we saw with the third Passover on June 13th, we saw Trump pleading not guilty to 37 criminal charges in Miami, Florida. Okay. So what's interesting to me about these like court dates happening during Passover? So like I said, I think there's kind of this connection to the Passover lamb. Okay. Um, you know, kind of like this concept of the Passover lamb dying to protect you from death. Okay. You know, so definitely the picture of Jesus the Messiah is, painted in the Passover lamb. Okay, where he dies for our sins, and so then we don't have to suffer the consequences of our sins because of his suffering. So what's really interesting with Trump kind of having, okay, so this is what I really think. What's really interesting about Trump, like having these court dates connected to these Passover dates, is that what I think is that he imagines himself to be like a type of suffering servant. Like he actually said that. He says, I am suffering. Let me think how he said it. He says like I'm being indicted on your behalf or whatever, so he talks about himself in these very messianic terms, and he like delusionally kind of pictures himself a type of Messiah who's suffering, for his people. Okay. And, and then I'm sure his followers look at him the same way. Okay. So really kind of scary and creepy, and, and frightening. So you got that going on. Okay, and so then what I'm wondering with the three Passovers is we see that expression time, times, and the dividing of time or half a time a lot in scriptures. Okay, so I'm wondering if is the dividing of time happening in July. Okay, so in Daniel 12:7 we read, I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So that's one of the places we see that expression. Okay. So is that going to happen in July? And so a big question, that, everyone's asking, and, are we in the last days? I really think we're in the last days. And I like, especially with the 9th of Av, I've been looking at the 9th of Av, like 2020, let me think. I can't remember what year it was, but there was one year I made a video about the 9th of Av because I was pretty convinced that Jesus was going to come back on that 9th of Av. Okay, but then it didn't happen. But there's so many 9/11 signs, okay, that and if you understand, about the 9th of Av, it's significant to the Jewish people, okay, like the two temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av. The civil war was that started in Israel happened on the eve of the 9th of Av. So just a really significant date. And that's why the Jewish people fast for 3 weeks before the 9th of Av, because, they're pretty, they very soberly considered this, they just consider this time frame very, like they said we should take it really seriously and be repentive and sober and fasting. So they take it very seriously. Okay. And so now with that coming up, there's like, so I made this list of like 4 things that to me are like, yeah, we have got to be like really close to the end. So I guess I'd be really, really, really surprised if nothing happens on the 9th of Av. Because especially when you, okay, so here are like kind of the four main signs that I'm seeing that to me, are convincing me that we're in the last days. Okay. So first in Israel, we have um uh so Israel, they've been having, ever since Netanyahu got in power, they've been having these protests over the judicial reform, almost like clockwork. Okay. And they're starting to get kind of worse. Like they used to just do it every Saturday night, but now they're doing it during the week. And like, so like 2 weeks ago, they were shutting down the airport or the highway. And then like last week, they were shutting down the airport, like just causing the country to kind of go to a standstill because they're like filling up the highways or blocking the airport, so just not a good thing. The other thing that's really bad about these protests in Israel is that okay, so Netanyahu is pretty insistent about pushing through this judicial reform. Okay, regardless of the fact that there's so many people that are against it. And I mean, it's really kind of a right-left issue in Israel. That the people on the right are kind of for it, and the people on the left are way against it. Okay, and so what's happening is that some of the people on the left that are part of these protests over the judicial reform, their protest is even causing the military people to like they say, if Netanyahu continues to push through this reform, that they're not going to report to like the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, or their positions in the military. Okay, well that's like really dangerous. I mean, Israel's a small country. They don't have a lot of people to draw from for the military, and then to have a certain percentage of people to like not show up and protest, and not serve their military service, that's very dangerous. I mean, especially now when you consider that Israel is just surrounded by their enemies, and they have tensions, there's kind of these ongoing tensions with their enemies. Okay. And it keeps getting worse. A lot, some of the stuff Netanyahu does makes it worse. Okay, because he wants to build settlements. In disputed lands. In some of the disputed parts of Israel. So it's kind of this like snowball type rolling down the hill, getting worse all the time. Okay. So so it seems like Israel's getting ready to implode. So that's going on. Okay. And then in America, so, for the people that live in America, you're very aware of, kind of the tensions between right and left. Okay. And so especially with all these court dates of Trump and stuff, I mean, you definitely see like they're closing in on Trump, that it's getting closer to the time when, he could actually end up, having to pay for some of his crimes. But it's interesting because then you have the Trump followers. I mean, I believe that Trump is guilty. Okay. For a lot of the stuff. I talked about in my last video about why I think he might not have been guilty for the E. Jean Carroll affair. I won't repeat that. You could go listen to that. But I definitely think he spurred on these insurrectionists for January 6th, and it seems like there's a lot of evidence about him trying to overturn the election and false electors. But what we have now is the Trump followers are using all that stuff as evidence, to say that the people on the left, are trying to get rid of Trump. Okay. And so there's just really this tension going on between the two sides. Okay. Um, so that's very interesting. Um, and so I believe that Trump is the insurrectionist that we read about in scripture, and the fourth beast. I think Netanyahu is the little horn. He's Michael in Daniel 12:1. What we also see happening right now is the war ramping up between Ukraine and Russia. Like, they are just really like ramping up their strikes against each other, and and it's kind of like that same snowball effect where Ukraine just last week bombed a bridge, and so then Russia retaliated. So that's happening. And then the other thing too is the many last day signs. Okay. That are happening right now. So there's a lot of weather signs going on that people blame on climate change. So I kind of made a list here. So we got a dust storm. Okay, so these are all the last day signs, like the dust storm going on. There's been, okay, so in the animal category, we've had whale attacks, shark attacks, alligator attacks, bear attacks. Like in our state, in our city, they've had a bat with rabies. We've seen, other diseases going on. There's been earthquakes going on. So the weather stuff has just been incredible. Okay, so the nonstop heat wave, I mean, in America and Europe, is having a heat wave thing going on. The hail has, in various places has been incredible, the damage that it's been causing. They either calling it apple size hail or tennis ball size hail. There's been earthquakes in California I read about. The tornadoes and the flooding has just been incredible. The flash floods going on. You'll hear about one state, and then like 2 days later another state's being flooded or being hit by a tornado. It's just terrible. And like a couple weeks ago they had like tornadoes in the Chicago area, which is kind of unprecedented. We've been hearing about shootings and protests, a lot of unrest. I heard a story about a dad like shot and killed, I think, his wife and the 3 kids, or maybe the wife survived, but he killed his 3 kids. It was terrible. So, and today I read about, or I saw a video about there was this pink dolphin sighting in Louisiana, so that was kind of interesting. But then there's been kind of these plagues, like bugs, like near here in Colorado, there's been kind of this grasshopper plague. And then my sister's mother-in-law has had her assisted living place she lived had bed bug infestation, which was terrible. And then like the fires going on in California. So we've been just hearing like unprecedented, about the weather. That term unprecedented comes up a lot. Just records have been being broken left and right. So definitely, and like I can never do a complete list, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. It's like every time you turn on the news, it's like, whoa, look at all these last day type stuff. You know, it's just always bad news, you know. Um, so, um, so let's talk about Netanyahu in Israel. You know, so I think he's the little horn, okay? We read about that in Daniel 7. And so it says, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boast. And then the later in the chapter is kind of the explanation of the prophecy. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for times, and half a time. Okay. So this little horn, what's interesting is it talks about the little horn possessing eyes. Okay, so that reminds me of the 2 witnesses. Okay, you know, it has the eye like the eyes of a man and a mouth uttering great boasts. Okay, definitely sounds like Netanyahu. And then it says he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. So like wearing down the Jewish people in Israel. And then it says he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. Okay, so Netanyahu is insistent on trying to change the judiciary in Israel. Okay, you know, regardless of the consequences. You know, and the boasts, you know, like, you know, he just like he's really wanting to make peace with, you know, do one of those peace-like things that Trump did with Saudi Arabia. Okay, because, you know, they always want to make a name for themselves. Okay. Oh, that's right. I was going to mention about the 3 horns that kind of lost their power when the little horn comes up. Okay, so that's definitely true about Netanyahu, because when he went into power, so Lapid lost his power, Bennett lost his power, and Benny Gantz, okay, were kind of the 3 that, you know, because of the shifting from the left to the right, you know, those people on the left lost their power. Okay, so, you know, so that's coming true. And then I definitely think Netanyahu is Michael that we read about in Daniel 12:1. Okay, on December 1st, I think Netanyahu was putting together a coalition on that date. You know, so Daniel 12:1 connects to December 1st. Okay. And then it says, now at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands over the sons of your people, so sons would connect to like the Jewish people in Israel, will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Okay, so definitely it's been a time of distress ever since Netanyahu got back into power. Okay, so that's Netanyahu. Okay, so let's talk about they're closing in on Trump. Okay, so I definitely think when we read about, okay, so in the Gospels, when we read about the crucifixion of Jesus, we hear about this insurrectionist, okay, Barabbas, okay, and you know, so I think Trump is fulfilling the prophecy of the insurrectionists. Okay, so it says, now at the feast he used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. The man named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection. The crowd went up and began asking him to do as he had been accustomed to do for him. Okay, so they wanted, I think this was Pilate. They wanted Pilate Oh, yeah, here it says, verse 9. Pilate answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask him to release Barabbas for them instead. Answering again, Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with him with whom you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." But Pilate said to them, "Why, what evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them. And after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. So, we sort of see in part with prophecy, and some not, so these verses are a little foggy of how they're going to be fulfilled. But I kind of think that basically, we have this crowd of people that are wanting Barabbas. Okay, so during the time of Jesus, they're wanting Barabbas to be released instead of Jesus. Okay. And so now in our day, we have these Trump followers that are more concerned about Trump returning to power than Jesus, returning and coming to power. Okay. So in a way, the fact that they are so willing to, almost practically worship Trump, they're like crucifying Jesus. Okay. In a spiritual, symbolic way. Okay. So I think that's kind of how these verses are being fulfilled right now with Trump. Okay. So that's Trump, the insurrectionist. I think Trump is like the fourth beast that we read about in Daniel 7. And it says, "Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different than all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell." So we already read about that. The little horn. But the fourth beast, okay. It's partly a system because it's like the fourth beast with the 10 horns. Okay. So it's kind of like this group of people. So I think it's Trump and his followers. His followers are the 10 horns, and they would connect to the 10 people in the wilderness that had no faith, the 10 spies that had no faith in the wilderness. Okay. And so the fourth beast, what does he do? He's different from all the others. He's dreadful. He has teeth of iron and claws of bronze. And he ends up devouring, crushing, and trampling down. We read about in Daniel 9 about the destroyer that's coming. Okay. And so I definitely think this is Trump. He himself might not do destruction, but he's definitely can stir up his followers to do destruction. We saw that on January 6th. Okay. But we read about in Daniel 9 that, at some point, the destroyer, let's see, how does it say it? Will be, lose its power. I think Jesus ends up bringing judgment to Trump. Okay. Because what I think happens is Trump brings judgment to Biden, and then the Messiah comes and, brings the judgment to Trump for his sins and destruction. So Daniel 9, let's see what it says here. Okay. Okay, and it says, "On the wing," this is Daniel 9:27, "on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate." So there's someone who comes who causes desolations. Okay, and I think that's going to be Trump. That he's going to cause the fall of America. Um, um, let's see, was there something else I was going to say? Oh, the other one thing too that stood out here was it talks about trampling down the remainder with his feet. Okay, so the feet would connect to like the bottom of Daniel's statue. Like, like definitely a picture of like we're at the end of that prophetic picture with the statue. Okay, that we went through all the, different kings that connect to that statue, and now we're down to the feet. Okay, of that statue. So that's that. Okay. I mean, so, so let's read about Donald Trump Jr. Okay, Donald Trump Jr. was roasted for claiming it will be the end of civilization if Daddy Donald is indicted for January 6th insurrection. Okay, so, so if you've been following the news, I mean, it almost takes, like, I'd love to see a flowchart listing all the, well, I don't know if I really need to see it, but all the current court cases of Donald Trump, and indictments and whatever, all that stuff coming up and the timing of it and stuff. But it seems like James Smith, is that his name, is really, like he's done all the work. He's interviewed a bunch of people. Like he's really getting close to, and he sent a letter to Trump on the 16th of July. A target letter is what they call it, from Jack Smith, saying that, like, I guess a target letter means that you're close to being indicted or whatever, so it seems like Jack Smith is really wanting to do that really quick, or he's ready to do it really quick. I mean, mostly what we've seen with Trump is just trying to fight and push off a lot of these court cases and stuff like that. Like he's trying to push him off to pass the election, which then we know that means he's just gonna like probably try to pardon himself when he's president or something, or fire the DOJ or who knows, so one of the things I wanted to point out is Donald Trump Jr. is now 45 years old. I thought that was interesting. And then I kind of think, so the fact that he claimed it's going to be the end of civilization. Okay, what he was meaning is that he sees like the fact that Donald, his dad might be indicted, like being a picture of like the fall of civilization, because apparently he's delusional in his head and he thinks his dad is innocent, just like a lot of the Trump followers. Okay, and so they're fulfilling the verse about the delusional, the delusion that God's going to put on a group of people in the last days. But what's interesting is that I kind of think that Donald Trump Jr. is actually kind of unwittingly being a prophet in what he was, just using that phrase about the end of civilization. I think God might be using him to, unwittingly send a message about, okay, it's going to be the end of America, because I really do think that, when they try to indict Donald Trump, that it's going to, start the civil war in this country. So that's what I'm thinking. Oh, and what's interesting too is that this is going to be the third indictment of Trump. Okay, so that number 3 is always kind of interesting. It's kind of that number of completion and stuff. Okay. So they're closing in on Trump. Then we have war ramping up between Ukraine and Russia. Matthew 24:6 talks about wars and rumors of wars. Okay. Um, so, and we could, there, Matthew 24 is actually a great verse, if you want to read about what to look for in the last days. And I think, like all that stuff is, has either been fulfilled or is happening right now. I don't think there's anything that's in there that, hasn't happened. I just don't think there's anything else that we need to look for, for the last days. I think everything's been in place. We've had we got the seventh king right now. We got an eighth king, quote unquote, waiting in the wings to, step up. We have the left in power in America. We have the right in power in Israel. So we have kind of those wings of the eagle. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the weather signs and how they're blaming it on climate change. Okay. So since I believe in God and since I believe that he controls the weather, and I don't believe in this climate change in any way, shape, or form, I believe that God's trying to get our attention through the weather stuff. Okay. One, he's chastising his people. Okay. He's preparing us for the coming of the Messiah. And so the suffering that we're going through right now is, like God says, consider it joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the trials, is what, makes us, holy, what chastises us. So he talks about that in James, I think. So he's preparing us for the coming of the Messiah. I mean, not a lot of fun, but it, hopefully it'll have its great result, that will be holy, when the Messiah comes. But then, he's also kind of trying to send a message to those people that don't believe. Okay. So let's read about this in Exodus 9. Okay, so like I said, I believe that there was the original Exodus, that happened many, many, many years ago. Okay, and then there's going to be a greater Exodus in the last days. We are definitely in the greater Exodus. A lot of the fulfillment of Moses and Aaron has been happening with Trump and Biden, maybe Trump and Netanyahu. Just a lot of the fulfillment, like Moses and Aaron, has definitely been happening in our day. A lot of the same type of stuff. Like I said, the 10 spies during the time of Moses, Trump's people are a picture, are the 10 spies that don't believe, that don't have faith. And then there's this small group of people. There was 2 spies that had faith. So there's this remnant of people that actually believe in God, and believe God's promises, but there's this, larger group of people, the 10, that don't believe God, and so those are the Trump followers. So in Exodus, okay, so let's read about this. Then the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues on you and your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. But indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Okay, so why is God sending all these weather signs and plagues? Okay, so that people will know that there was no one like him in all the earth. Okay, this is the problem with conspiracy theories, because we end up giving humans more power than they actually have, and then we end up taking away the power from God. Okay, so there was conspiracy theories about the Titanic. Okay, well, if you believe these conspiracy theories, then you won't see the the part of God in the Titanic story. Okay, God was allowing judgment to come on the arrogant people of the Titanic. Okay. Um, and the same thing with the Titans sub. Don't believe the conspiracy theories, okay? Why did it implode? Because the guy didn't follow the rules. He broke the rules of science. He was arrogant. He thought he was different, that he could somehow bend these rules and it didn't matter. He didn't need to be certified, okay? Um, and so the same thing with, okay, so climate change, calling the weather stuff climate change, you're giving people too much power. You're saying somehow we can control what happens with the weather, instead of recognizing that God is the one in control of the weather. Okay. So that's the problem with conspiracy theories, is it's warping the truth. We're not really seeing the truth. Okay. If you want the truth, open your Bible. Okay. Okay, in Exodus 7, it says, but the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had said. Okay, so this was actually when Moses had turned the water into blood, and then the magicians of Egypt ended up, doing the same thing, turning the water into blood. Okay, so now in our day, the magicians of Egypt would be like the scientists, okay? The scientists that are calling the weather events climate change, okay? So, that would be a prophetic picture of, well, that's how we're fulfilling that prophecy, okay? And then Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So instead of people turning to God and repenting, their heart's being hardened, okay? And they're not listening to, like God's true prophets or God's word, because they're listening to the magicians or the scientists instead that talk about climate change, okay? Because it's everywhere, like turn on your news, climate change, Okay, so Daniel 9 says, okay, as it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come on us, yet we have not sought. Okay, so this is Daniel was saying a prayer, okay? He was, I think this is when he's, recognized that, 70 years, was the time frame he wanted to look into. So then he started praying, like, okay, it's been 70 years, let me pray, and, see if God can get things rolling. And so he says, as it is written in the law of Moses, all this calamity has come on us, yet we have not sought the favor of the Lord our God by turning from our iniquity and giving attention to your truth. Therefore, the Lord has kept the calamity in store and brought it on us. For the Lord our God is righteous with respect to all his deeds and which he has done, but we have not obeyed his voice. Okay, very powerful. Gives me chills. Okay, I don't think I can add to that. Daniel said it very well. So God is the one that brings the calamity in the cities. Okay, he's the weatherman. Okay. Okay. So then, okay, so I can't remember what I've said. So 3 Passovers, then I'm thinking 2 weeks of Sukkot in the 7th month. So we find out about kind of like a second week of Sukkot in 1 Kings 8 and 2 Chronicles 7. Okay. So see, what's really interesting is when God talks about the Sukkot, it's in the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar. But we could do kind of an equivalent on the Gregorian calendar. Okay, so that would make July 15th to the 21st, the first week of Sukkot, with the 22nd being like the 8th day of Sukkot. Okay. Because this, July is the 7th month, so July 15th would be the first day of Sukkot. Okay, but then, like I said, we read about there being a second week, so that would be like July 23rd to the 29th, which would actually help be, give us a fulfillment of Daniel 9:27, where you have the middle of the week being July 26th to the 27th. Okay, these dates that I'm looking at, 8 and 9. Okay, where they put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. Okay, or he puts a stop, whoever he is. Okay, however that's fulfilled. Okay, so I mean, he could be Trump putting an end to, like, if you consider Biden and the people on the left, causing sacrifice and grain offering because they're, causing God's people to be kind of in slavery, and they're spending our money, so, maybe Trump's the one putting a stop to it, but ultimately it's God that's putting a stop to the sacrifice and grain offering. So Av 8 and 9 is on July 26th, 27th. Okay, so will God shorten the days and not make us wait until September 11th? That's another 9/11. Or November 9th is actually a 9/11 type date, 11/9. That was actually when Kristallnacht happened in Germany right before World War II was on 11/9. Okay. So you definitely see God, like, using these numbers, repeating these numbers, in history. Okay. What's interesting is that we see a type of 666 on July 25th. Okay. On July 25th, it's going to be 6 years, 6 months, 6 days since Trump's inauguration. Okay. To me, I think that's kind of interesting when you think about July 25th. You know how we always talk about, like, Christmas in July? Okay. So, like, July 25th would be like the, Christmas would be like Christmas. Okay. And so I think it's interesting that Trump's going to be 666 on Christmas, because then that kind of connects to this whole thing of, like, how Trump is trying to usurp, Jesus's position. He fashions himself a Messiah. He acts like a Messiah. He talks like a Messiah. He thinks he's suffering like the Messiah. So I definitely think that's kind of interesting. What's interesting is that 888 is on July 27th. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's some type of, I haven't found it yet. Maybe there's some type of 777 on July 26th. I'll have to look at that. But Biden would be 80 years, 8 months, 8 days if he survives till the 27th. Okay. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So I haven't really, like, I've been doing calculations and stuff, but I don't remember if there was other. I mean, there is like a 62 number that shows up on the 26th. Let me think. Yeah, the 26th is 62 days from Shavuot. So that's kind of interesting, because we read about in Daniel about Darius gets the kingdom at approximately 62. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, so some other miscellaneous verses. In Jonah, it says, then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish. Okay, so remember I said in my last video that Biden is the beast from the sea. Okay, so, like, he's the great sea monster. Okay. So Jonah says, water encompassed me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. Then the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah up onto the dry land. Okay, so I liked Jonah's words because I think he's kind of doing a good description of our slavery, under Biden. Water encompassed me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. And then it's interesting because Jonah ends up getting vomited onto the dry land, and so I think Trump is the beast of the earth, the dry land. Okay. Um, so then I wrote, we are in slavery to the people in power over us, just like the first Exodus in Egypt. At some point, we are in slavery to the people in power over us, just like the first Exodus in Egypt. At some point, God will set us free from our slavery. Okay, so we read about this in Deuteronomy. God said, and you grumbled in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us. Where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt, saying, the people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there. Then I said to you, do not be shocked, nor fear them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, will himself fight on your behalf, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness, where you saw how the Lord your God carried you, just as a man carries his son, in all the way which you have walked until you came to this place. But for all this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who goes before you on your way, to seek out a place for you to encamp, in fire by night and cloud by day, to show you the way in which you should go. Okay, very powerful verses. Okay, so there's this group of people. So with the Israelites, they were, the spies came back, excuse me, and caused the Israelites to start grumbling in their tents and to start, they weren't believing God, okay? And so I definitely think that's, like, I really see a lot of the picture of QAnon here, okay, because of the lies of QAnon. Like, okay, so Biden has a lot of power, okay, but the story that QAnon paints is kind of like, they have this whole teaching about the pedophiles that eat children's blood. It's like really beyond reality. Okay, so they're making out the people on the left to be even more powerful than they really are. God has allowed the people on the left to, to be in power. But QAnon stories, are just, they're like the spies. There's giants in the land, so it's causing people to get afraid, okay? And what we need to do is put our hope and our faith in God that he is the one who's going to fight on our behalf, okay? So big deal that Biden's got power over us, okay? It's the same thing as, when the Israelites were in Egypt, okay? The Egyptians had power over them then, but God was still able to set them free, okay? So let's not get all bent out of shape, okay? That, there's people in power that are evil, okay? We actually, it should actually be kind of exciting because it means that, the Bible's coming true. The prophecies are coming true because God said that was going to happen. There was going to be a second greater Exodus. We were going to be in the second time frame of slavery before he sets us free, into the Messianic era. Okay. So let's see. Oh, I did want to make the point because I thought there was something else I was going to say. Okay, so how the disciples, they told Jesus, they said, we have two swords. Okay, like they were all ready to go to war. Okay, and and Jesus had to like tell them like, okay, my kingdom is not of this world. If I wanted you to fight, like, I don't need you to fight because God is the one who's going to, create my kingdom. Um, and so, um, the disciples had told Jesus that we had two swords, and Jesus said that is enough. And so I've been thinking about that. I mean, basically what it is that there's three groups of people, okay? And so you have one sword for the people on the right and one sword for the people on the left. But the people in the middle that belong to Jesus, we do not need a sword, okay? We're not going to be participating in the last days war, okay? We are going to stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, okay? Just like he did at the dividing of the sea, okay? We are not going to be fighting, okay? We don't need a sword, okay? God himself is the one who's going to fight on our behalf, just like it says in verse 30, okay? Okay, and then in Jeremiah, there's another verse too. Jeremiah 31:11 says, "For the Lord has ransomed Jacob and redeemed him from the hand of him who was stronger than he." Okay, so see, God says in his word there's going to be someone that's stronger than his people, okay? And that's all just so God can swoop in and rescue us, okay? And redeem us from the hand of those who are stronger than us, okay? I mean, God, likes to make it as dark as possible so that when his light shines, we're going to see how bright it is. Okay. So don't despair. Okay. It's a good story. Okay. I know it's hard now. Okay. But remember that he's carrying us. Okay. Like it says here in verse 31, in the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you. Okay. So what I kind of think is that when Trump was president, that was kind of like, a type of being in Egypt. And then now we're in the wilderness under Biden. Okay. And then, so things have gotten worse under Biden, and then God's carrying us during this time. Okay. And so then what I think is that Rachel is weeping. Okay, it says, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. I saw there was a survey of, if people thought Trump or Biden would be fit to be the next president, and like 50% of the population thought neither of them. Like 50% voted no for Trump, and 50% voted in the survey. They thought neither of them were, fit to be president. So, I mean, if you're like me, you just kind of look at all these people that are like wanting to run for office, and you don't see a lot of hope in the people, okay? Like what happened to the way America used to be like, okay? So that's why Rachel would be like weeping for her children, and so I wonder if American believers have been grieving since July 4th, okay? That was kind of a big day, and to really just kind of see, the downfall of this country, what things are like, and so, because the reason why, I was wondering about that is because the 24th day from July 4th would be July 27th, which is the date that we're looking at. What we have now is the Jewish people are currently in the middle of 3 weeks of fasting, mourning, repenting. Okay, so that's, like I said, that connects to the 9th of Av. That goes from July 6th to July 27th. Okay. So we read about in Esther, it's, Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go unto the king, which is not according to law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, So we see Daniel mourning for 3 entire weeks. Okay, he says, I did not eat any tasty food, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed. On the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river. So the 24th day would be, like if you count the 3 weeks of fasting for the Jewish people ends on the 27th, but then if you have this 24th day, it takes us to the 29th, which really doesn't make any sense to me. But 24 could be symbolic of 666, 4 sixes. But it makes sense if American believers have been grieving since July 4th, then the 24th day would be July 27th. But the 21 days could be the 3 Passovers, then the 3 days could be the July 25th, 26th, 27th. And that would connect to like the story of the cupbearer and the baker, where you have 3 days and 3 days. So July 25th could be Christmas in July, and the 3rd day takes us to July 27th. But also, like a 3-day time frame of not eating, or the 3 weeks that Daniel was mourning could connect to the 3 years of like COVID. So there's that. Okay. And then just really quickly, like Haggai, he talks about, on Haggai 2, he talks about the 7th month, the 21st day. So I'm really kind of waiting to see what happens. That'll be tomorrow. Like if something significant happens on the 21st. If I had more time, I'd like read this chapter and we could talk about it more. But just I'm going to do a really quick overview on. In Haggai 2:10, it talks about the 9th month, the 24th day, in the 2nd year. So last year was like the 2nd year abided. Okay, so that would actually connect to Hanukkah on the Hebrew calendar. And then in Haggai 2:18, it talks about the 9th month, the 24th day, the day when the temple was founded. That could connect to July 4th, because what I found out is that July 4th is the 9th month, the 24th day from 9/11/2022, so definitely interesting. And then we read about in Haggai 2:20, on the second time on the 24th, that could be July 27th, which, like I said, is the 24th day after July 4th. Okay, so what happens, on the second time on the 24th? Okay, so God says to Haggai, speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the power of the kingdoms of the nations, and I will overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders will go down, every one by the sword of another. Okay, so I highlighted that and said that is everyone by the sword of another. Okay, so that connects to the 2 swords that Jesus said was enough. A sword for the people on the right, a sword for the people on the left. So civil war, So like I said, I said this before, and God says it, so you shall observe to do just as the Lord your God commanded. You shall not turn aside to the right or the left, okay? Don't go either left or right, okay? Stay in the middle with Jesus, okay? Because remember, when Jesus was dying on the cross, there was thieves on both sides of him, okay? So this is from Back to the Future, Out of Time. I definitely think we're going to see the fulfillment of this really soon. Burning on the right, burning on the left, and then, the division of the sea. We got the Sea of Biden, we got the Sea of Trump. We want to be on the dry land with Messiah in the middle, no lies. Revelation 16:19, the great city was split into 3 parts. Okay, the great city there could connect to all of America. Okay, being split into 3 parts. And the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. That connects back to the cupbearer that puts the cup into Pharaoh's hand. I think the cupbearer is Trump, and he puts the cup, of God's fierce wrath into Biden's hand. Okay, is what I think happens. And then Jesus does it, puts the cup of wrath into Trump's hand. Okay, so hopefully, hopefully that was made some kind of sense for you, and it's helpful for you to see that we're in the last days. So I know times are hard right now. God's has really ramped up our slavery, especially with the weather too, the hot, like there's been so many things like canceled this summer because of the heat. So I mean, really our lives are kind of like on hold right now because of, the slavery, the bondage that we're in. But hang on, because God's going to set us free. I read, I don't remember where the verse was, but he talks about freeing, I think it was a psalm where it talks about freeing us from the dust heap or something like that. And, the fact that I live in a very dusty house, and that I'm just so busy I don't have time to dust my house, it's like, oh man, I could use freedom from this dust heap that I live in. So read the Psalms if you need some encouragement, because there's so much of God's promises are in the Psalms of what he's planning to do for the last days. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you tuning in. God bless. Hang in there. So take care.